going to slip in for what many of you know as murder sinks, why it gets its name. Sinkhole murders, Sandy Creek murders, Aucilla murders, Aucilla sink murders, just depending on, everybody's heard it called something different. We're going to slip around to these sinkholes. Checking out the Aucilla sinks. Heading down in the area where the victims of the Sandy Creek murders were found. Welcome back. We find ourselves down here at the Aucilla sinks. One that a lot of people know of is called the waterhole sinks. It's known for two reasons. Artifact hunters over the years. The second thing they're known for, and it's called different names, but most people in this area know it as the Aucilla sinkhole murders, but it's more affectionately known in a lot of other areas over in Bay County as the Sandy Creek murders. Subsequently, artifact hunters are what led to that whole scene. Artifact hunters found the bodies in these sinks, the watering hole sink. Actually, got one of the gentlemen who was involved in that is going to give me a little interview. I'm hoping to have a recording on that. He's a little tied up and said he would get with me. So I'm hoping we're going to be bringing that to you shortly. To understand the Sandy Creek murders, we got to go take a little trip and go over to Bay County at a little place called Sandy Creek Boat Ramp in that general area. See, if you watch the Aucilla smuggler video, which we're going to bring a follow-up and a close-up right here shortly, it's coming. Some of the same characters and backdrops were connected and involved in the Bay County murders, which is where the first one of these murders happened. The other three were carried out here on the Aucilla sinks. Walter Steinhorst, good book on that. Twisted Justice, very good book. Some actual trial detail accounts of the heinous murders that Walter Steinhorst caused here. Anyhow, some artifact hunters come over here to hunt some artifacts, some teenagers, and found those bodies. Some of that marijuana was coming from the same location and same connections in the end as some of the marijuana that was coming in at the Aucilla. So they were distantly connected in higher up connections. Many people here know them murders, have heard the different stories. I've pulled a lot of records, read a lot of stuff that's been wrote on it, so I just thought today we'd give you a little bit of a tidbit on it. Over the years, I was intrigued about the Sandy Creek murders when I was a child. I heard people talk about them and was always interested in them, but when I asked information, nobody really knew a whole lot other than that they had been found and killed here. So when I got older and got interested and went to researching it, and then I got a book, Twisted Justice book, and no, I'm not being paid nothing to tell you that. It's just, I read that book, and it coincides with exactly what most of the records and the newspaper articles show. And in that book, and there's now part 2, a lot of his interviews are with the people who done it, so it's a pretty accurate depiction of what went on. And there ain't no doubt that Mr. Steinhorst was not just a by chance. He was a professional. He had homes in New York, which also a farm in New York. He had a place in Georgia. And if you read the transcripts where Charlie Hughes was involved with him during the final stages of the murder, and the detail and precision of how he tells him to put them blocks on, you can tell this is not a first time for him. Charlie Hughes describes in detail some of the events that happened that night, and it's kind of gut-wrenching really when you think about it. I mean, even in the court trials, they said he was told by one of the orchestrators that the more people you have to shoot, the more money you'll make. So these guys were professionals. They weren't messing around. It was a bad situation, yes. If you read in the book and you read actually some of the history and look up some of the backdrop on the people who were killed, the 2 boys, yeah, they did come from kind of shady backdrop, more troublemakers. May have been down in hunting trouble. That don't justify the killing of them. You know, it is what it is. But a lot of people have used that to define this place. Based on the fact that when you do the records, they were tied into some of all those other bunches, like I just told you a while ago. They knew this area. They all hunted this area, had ties to this area. They didn't happen upon it, and they talk about that. That's why they chose this area to dump those bodies. After Mr. Steinhorst killed them, Mr. Hughes, I believe it was sent to town. He went to Cashway Building Products and bought some concrete blocks and baling wire and come back. Well, you'll have to read the book to see the rest. But the history books show it. If it hadn't been for Mr. Pridgeon and Mr. English coming down here hunting some artifacts, nobody would have ever known, because they dumped the truck and all evidence. It all leads back to a bigger deal, especially when you figure out that that whole deal was set up by the FBI in an operation to catch members of the Capot family. So, interesting book, a lot of history here in North Florida. The events and backdrop, as I told you, this was connected to a lot of the other drug deals that was going on at the same time, the same players, in around the same time in the late 70s. Billy Joe Vines, who had now turned into an informant, and the FBI was involved in setting up a sting to catch some of the members of the Capot family. In the result, those teenagers and young men were killed and dumped. Nothing would have ever been said. The situation went terrible. They scuttled the ship. I forget how many bales of marijuana they found floating off the coastline over around Bay County too. Some of the marijuana made it in and was distributed out. But had it not been for those two boys hunting for artifacts and finding those remains, 8 months, 9 months, maybe a year later, I don't really remember, that story would have never come to life. And in the aftermath, most of the people who orchestrated it did very few years. Walter Steinhorst, the trigger man, ultimately died in prison. David Goodwin, not long ago, been paroled. Charlie Hughes, I didn't really do a whole lot of research on Mr. Hughes. There was so much more information available online from Mr. Goodwin's interview and some of the different articles that were run and court transcript. So no doubt Mr. Steinhorst died in prison. Mr. Goodwin is a free man. I've watched some of his interviews online. He talks about the events that went on that night as he seen them and how he remembered them. And between that and the book that I read and some of the documents that I've seen, it paints a pretty good picture. You had some financiers there. The FBI was trying to set them up. The men on the ground, they were all about business. Mr. Steinhorst, he was all about securing the scene. And that showed in the result of the death of those 4 people.